I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. You know, we're less than 2 weeks away from the national deadline for paying our taxes. Isn't that a fun thing to think about? In honor of that, we thought, well, you know what? Let's dive into the topic of state taxes. Where does your money go and how is it spent? And I know many of you watching live live now or later. Well, you live outside of Oregon, but that's okay. Pay attention anyway, because your state's not that different. Are you ready? Let's have some fun. Let's talk about the budget for the great state of Oregon. That is our big story tonight. Okay, well, now I know that the accountants out there are saying, oh goody, we're going to do a story on numbers. I love stories on numbers. I love stories on numbers. And the rest of you are toying with the thought of saying, dude, just wake me up when it's over. How boring is that? But I know you're not really actually thinking that because you're a very highly intelligent group that watches this. I know, I read your emails, I hear your voicemails, and if you were the type who watched, I don't know, other stations, other newscasts, I might have to do something ridiculous to get you interested. They really went over the top with that one. But I know you're not like that, so I know we don't have to do that. I know you understand how important this stuff is, whether you're interested in the environment or housing or the homeless or gun control or semiconductors or any number of topics. Those all involve money. And a lot of that money comes from taxpayers. But the supply is not endless. The state cannot spend money it does not have, with the exception of bonds, which, hold that thought, I'll get to it in a bit. Our guide to Oregon's budget is State Senator Elizabeth Steiner, the Senate co-chair of the legislature's Ways and Means Committee. Big job? Big job.
Being co-chair is a big job.
Yeah.
We run a $32 billion general and lottery fund budget for the biennium, and my partner, Representative Sanchez, and I are primarily responsible for allocating all that.
First, let's take a look at where the money comes in for the state budget. This graphic is from the Oregon Fiscal Office. We're looking at the income for the 2021-23 budget year. And see where it shows $121.165 billion total funds? Well, yes, that is a ton of money, but most of it is off limits to Oregon lawmakers. I'm showing you this to give you the full picture. That number comes from several areas, including general funds, which include all the taxes that individuals and companies pay each year. It also comes from lottery money. Yes, the state really does make $1.5 billion every 2 years off lottery players who play and lose. And it comes from other funds. That's a big chunk. It's made up of money state agencies can charge for services or licensing. That includes, among other things, a fee doctors have to pay to hold a medical license and the fee the rest of us pay for a driver's license. Finally, a big chunk comes from federal funds, which includes all the money sent to Oregon by the federal government for Medicaid or education or housing or other things. And if you wonder if the entire budget has grown, well, yes, it has. That's 1981 on the left and 2023 on the right. The top two colors represent those other funds and federal funds that lawmakers, for the most part, cannot touch in Oregon. But I can show you where that money goes. Here is the other fund spending. It goes to things like human services, there on the upper right, and the public employee retirement system, there on the left. The federal money goes mostly to the Oregon Health Authority and the Department of Human Services. But for our purposes of talking about what the Oregon legislature can spend, we're going to ignore everything besides general funds and lottery money.
Okay. So people should really just focus on, though, this $32 billion, which is general fund and lottery money.
Yes.
Because that's what you have.
The $32 billion is what my colleagues in the legislature and I have control over in terms of how we allocate it. All the rest of it is dedicated and we don't have a lot of control.
Budget cycles start every 2 years, so the next budget will be 2023 through 2025. And just to make things a little bit confusing, the budget year starts on July 1st. So that means last year, agencies were figuring out how much money they'd need to keep doing all the things they're doing now. They also toss in some extra things they'd like to do if there is enough money.
I have a quick question about
Sure.
the agencies putting together the budgets. I can just hear viewers saying, well, shouldn't the agencies be looking at, do they really need to carry all these things forward, or maybe they should stop doing some things and save the taxpayers' money?
That's a great question. So agencies should look at those questions.
But do they?
They do,
Okay.
and the legislature does.
Okay.
So for example, there are programs that were included for a certain period of time, but they weren't included, for example, in the continuing service level, or CSL, that we talked about, because we weren't sure if they were going to work or not, and we want to see the data. And then if we don't see data that they're working, then we don't fund them again.
Okay, so that's the money coming into the state, billions of it, from the federal government and from fees that lawmakers can't really touch, and from the income tax and lottery money, which they can decide how to spend. For the current budget, which is done at the end of June 2023, it's roughly $29 billion. And for the next budget, which starts July 1st of 2023, the number's roughly $32 billion. But even within that big pot of money, some of it is already spent, and lawmakers can't really touch it. For example, education.
What continuing service level is for K-12 education is a matter of some debate, but currently the legislature says, and the Chief Financial Office say, that it's $9.5 billion for the 23-25 biennium. The governor put $9.9 billion for it into a recommended budget. The advocates are saying another number altogether, but we have to fund, at the very least, we really have to fund at the $9.5 billion.
Okay.
And that's all general fund, basically. Well, it's some corporate activities tax money and other things, but
it's coming out of that 32.
It's coming out of that 32.
Yeah.
And then there's the Department of Corrections.
Then we have the Department of Corrections. Department of Corrections is mandatory also, right? We have to pay for the cost of every person in custody at the state level, right? And that includes all their medical care, food, clothing, paying for the corrections officers, all that kind of stuff. It's very expensive. It's about $45,000 a year.
Per person?
Per person.
Department of Corrections will cost about $2 billion for the next 2 years. So here's how the budget shakes out for Oregon. Over the next 2 years, state lawmakers have about $32 billion to work with. But take out $9.9 billion for K-12 schools, and then take out another $3.9 billion for a variety of other school-related costs. They're already down to $18.2 billion. Next, we need to take out another $10.7 billion for human services, which includes everything from the state hospital to behavioral health and raises for home health care workers paid for by the state. Now we're at $7.5 billion. Take out another $3.3 billion for public safety. That includes the Department of Corrections and state police, all the district attorney's offices, child support, the military department, and more. Then take out another $1.1 billion for the judicial department. That includes all the state courts along with public defense. Now we're down to $3.1 billion. Toss in the remaining budgets: natural resources, $785 million, economic development, $512 million, administrative, $372 million, legislative branch, $191 million, transportation, $155 million, and we get down to about $1 billion. Still a big number, but not really in state budgetary terms. Half of that will go to various expenses, including the $200 million the governor wanted and got for housing, and $325 million for a grab bag of expected expenses, including extra money to keep people on Medicaid if the federal funding goes away, and more money to pay public defense attorneys, along with money for an emergency fund, raises for both state and non-state workers, and bonuses for some state workers. And the other half goes to the rainy day fund. Did you notice there was no money in there for an interstate bridge? That's where something called bonding comes in. It's a chance for the state to borrow money from anyone willing to invest in its general obligation bonds. The investors give the state money up front. Then the state pays them back later with interest.
GO bonds, general obligation bonds, we can use to build stuff that the state has part ownership of. Okay. So every 2 years, something called the State Debt Policy Advisory Commission.
Well, that's a juicy title.
It's very clear, at least, what it does. Issues a report that says, here's what we think the bonding capacity of the state is for this upcoming biennium, right?
What's the capacity mean?
Means how much money can we offer? What's the total amount of general obligation bonds we can sell during the 23-25 biennium?
And why isn't it infinite?
Great question. So, we generally, in this state, follow a practice that we do not use more than 5% of general fund for what's called debt service. Okay. Debt service is, you bought that bond from me, I have to pay you back for the amount that you bought it for plus the interest right? Because you gave me the money up front, so I'm paying you back.
Okay.
Okay? That's debt service.
So the state can sell $1.9 billion worth of general obligation bonds for the 23-25 budget. On top of that, the state can sell another $500 million in bonds backed by lottery money. So let's say a total of $2.5 billion, which sounds like a lot of money until you remember that Oregon needs to come up with $1 billion for the new bridge over the Columbia River, and the governor wants to spend more than $1 billion on housing and more on other programs. There's just not enough money for all of it.
So pretty good chance it's going to be $1 billion for the bridge?
That's the number that we've been told we have to put up. It's still under consideration. I don't want you quoting me saying that I've made any promises, but we have to put up $1 billion. So there's $1 billion from Washington, $1 billion from Oregon, probably close to $1 billion from the feds, and the rest is from tolling.
Yeah. Nobody likes to say that word.
I don't mind. I'm from the East Coast. I grew up with tolling. It's a user fee.
Yeah.
We should all be paying user fees.
And so just getting back to why it's most likely that the bridge money would come out of bonds, it's because that is a better place for the money to come out of than
cash.
Yeah.
I can't find $1 billion. We can't find $1 billion in general fund to pay for that.
Okay, so I hope that made sense. A couple of things to add in. Property tax, I forgot, that's coming in too, but that's all part of that $32 billion. And our numbers are close, but they're not exact, so don't get too hung up on that kind of stuff. Things can change. For example, there's a chance the legislature is going to try and pay for the bridge using bonds against ODOT's state highway tax fund and not the general fund. They'll use some of it maybe, but the rest would still be against the general bond. I hope that makes sense. Finally, though, there's the kicker. Now, that is money that taxpayers get back if the amount of taxes collected is at least 2% higher than the estimate at the beginning of the two-year budget cycle. So this year it will be way more than that, and the amount sent back to taxpayers will total nearly $4 billion. As you can imagine, lawmakers may be tempted to raid that fund, but they shouldn't. We'll be watching and we'll see. If it's left alone, Oregon taxpayers will most likely get a credit on their tax return next year. So, what are your thoughts on all this? Do you think lawmakers should keep that kicker refund and spend it or not? Are you surprised by anything that we put in the budget there? Let me know, will you? Send an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or you could always call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you on that. All right, moving on. Also in the legislature, though, today Senate Bill 4 easily passed the Oregon House and is on the way to the governor's desk for signature. The measure is meant to help land some of the billions of dollars being offered by the federal government for new semiconductor plants in America. Senate Bill 4 gives Governor Tina Kotek superpowers when it comes to picking land for tech companies that may want to expand here. 6 lawmakers were not there to cast a vote today. It didn't really matter, though. It passed 44-10 in the House. Governor Kotek told me yesterday she will soon sign the bill. Let's give a quick recap of what Senate Bill 4 will do, since it's on the cusp of becoming law now. Here's how the money shakes out. $210 million total. $190 million in state money would go to support applications by Oregon semiconductor companies for a piece of that $52 billion in federal money. $10 million would go to local governments to help prepare land for semiconductor development, and the final $10 million will go to the University Innovation Research Fund to help train the next generation of chip workers. Companies can apply for grants or loans of up to $50 million. For every $1 million they get, they must commit to job creation within Oregon, with 65% of the jobs being permanent and paying at least the median income for their location, or they have to promise to generate at least $1.25 million in state and local revenues. And here are the details on that superpower for Governor Kotek. She'll be able to issue an executive order and move a plot of land that is now outside the urban growth boundary inside the urban growth boundary. The boundary is what limits the growth on the outside edges of cities and towns in Oregon, so she'll be able to do that with up to 8 parcels of land, 2 that are any size larger than 500 acres and 6 that are any size up to 500 acres. She will only have that executive power, by the way, until the end of the year 2024. The governor must hold a public hearing and meeting near the site before bringing it into the urban growth boundary, and then take comments for 20 days. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, surely something like this involving land use in Oregon? I mean, come on, are you kidding me? Of course it's going to be challenged in court. And that is very possibly true. But an amendment to the bill narrows the scope of a challenge like that. It's going to be fast-tracked. The bill would not allow those suits to just toil and languish in court systems for months or even years. Instead, they head straight to the Oregon Supreme Court. Which basically means if you're going to challenge the governor after she chooses a plot of land, you get one chance to fight it in the state's highest court. It's worth noting that one of the co-chairs of the legislature's Committee on Semiconductors previously told us that despite the governor's superpower, land will not be taken from a farmer who does not want to sell. So on that front, we're going to have to wait and see. But following our story yesterday, we asked for your thoughts on the bill, and you have to say a lot, and most of it was negative, by the way. Amy says, I really do not support a chip company in Oregon. The land use and tax breaks are enough to make me say, go away. Our state can always sell out, but we can never get it back once it's sold. And many of you echoed themes in William's email. He wrote, let me get this straight. We have traffic problems, housing shortages, water shortages, environmental issues, and school deficiencies. Does it really make sense to bring in more people, traffic, and pollution? We also wanted to try and answer a question from a viewer named Michael.
I'm all for the CHIPS Act. I'm glad to see that the federal government is here looking at what we're doing. I'm wondering, some of this money that we get will go to education. How much of that will be spent in the BIPOC community?
Great question. Thanks for that. As we said earlier, there's $10 million going towards university innovation research funding. But as far as the BIPOC community is concerned, here's the exact wording in the bill when it comes to that money. It will be used for any purpose related to economic development for which monies in the University Innovation Research Fund may be used. And the fund itself is described as a grant matching program, meaning it's literally meant to just help Oregon's public research institutions leverage themselves to better qualify for federally funded grants. So there isn't really a hard answer to Michael's question, since it will be used for public universities instead of individuals or communities. The takeaway from today's segment is the Senate Bill 4 is through the legislature now and now awaits Governor Tina Kotek's signature.
Up next on the story, from Olympic glory
I've done something that the Lord blessed me with.
to homeless, how a boxer who won a gold medal in the Summer Games ended up living in a shelter in the basement of a church, and how he's using his situation as fuel moving forward.
But it's another start for my next move.
When the story returns.
Welcome back. Now to a story about a man who was once at the pinnacle of sport, winning a gold medal in the Olympics. And now he's homeless in Tacoma, Washington. Sugar Ray Seales boxed his way to gold in the Summer Games in Munich, Germany back in 1972. Now he's living in a shelter in the basement of a church, saying high rents are stopping him from finding a place of his own after he moved back to the city late last year. Lionel Donovan from our sister station in Seattle sat down with Seales to learn more about his plight.
I spoke to Mr. Seales today, the only Team USA boxer to win a gold during the 1972 Olympics. He told me that he was surprised to move here from Indianapolis and see rents be so high. But he's hoping that with a little help, he can give back even more to the city he calls home.
It's in the heart to get.
Sugar Ray Seales still carries a piece of history in his pocket.
I call it my American Express card. Yeah, never leave home without it, man.
A gold medal from the 1972 Olympics in Munich, Germany.
I feel I've done something that the Lord blessed me with. And not only that, my mother was there. And then from the Virgin Islands, they sent my dad. So now it was a family heirloom together.
Seales says he was proud to bring this victory back to Tacoma. And after retiring in 1984, he came back to the city to teach children with autism in Lincoln High for 17 years.
Now this is headquarters.
But today he lives in a men's shelter for Shiloh Baptist Church because he can't find an affordable place to live.
The other day we went to an apartment, and the apartment was $800 a month. But then when we got to the apartment, it went up to $1,100, $1,200, $1,400 a month.
So Mark Melsness of Spinnaker Property Management says Seales' story is all too common.
Or we're in a military environment, so we have military renters. And that is, I think, their number one comment to us is like, what happened?
Which is why Melsness says it's vital for Tacoma to make housing more affordable.
Let's go to the private market and let's give them some benefits to keep the rents down so that they don't bring them up to market. And how do we do that financially so they can pay their bills?
It's what you come for.
In the meantime, Seales says this is a chance to mentor other men in the shelter and encourage them to remember that this isn't where their story has to end.
But it's another start for my next move. Man, this don't even look right, and I hate to say it here, but it ain't none of that. You know why you here. I'm here for those guys upstairs.
Now, Seales also told me that although he's hung up his gloves, that doesn't mean he's retiring from the sport of boxing. He wants to open up his own boxing gym, and today he told me he found the perfect building to get started. From Tacoma, Lionel Donovan, King 5 News.
Still to come on the story, we've explored a lot of the consequences that would arise out of the Greater Idaho movement and shifting the border between Oregon and Idaho. One element we've not discussed, marijuana. We'll hear from a pot shop owner in Harney County when the story returns.
Next on KGW News at 6:30, it seems like every day another Portland business is dealing with burglars. See the new stats that show just how prevalent break-ins have become. Plus,
we have people living on our streets and dying on our streets, and it's projects like this that are going to help us in that.
The new shelter in Salem turning an old dorm into housing to help people get off the streets. That's just ahead at 6:30.
Let's get back to the Greater Idaho movement that we've been discussing over the past week and a half or so. The idea brings up all kinds of consequences that would come with moving the border. And in case you've missed it before, no, we really don't think it will happen. But yes, the movement does show there's deep anger in rural parts of Oregon. We explored a number of consequences last week, but we couldn't really get to all of them ourselves, so we asked our colleagues at our sister station in Boise to get reaction from parts of eastern Oregon that we couldn't reach. One huge difference between the two states, of course, involves drugs. You know, there's Measure 110 that eastern Oregon voted against, but passed anyway, thanks to urban areas like Multnomah County. And then what about marijuana? Well, Brian Holmes visited a pot shop in the town of Hines in Harney County.
Okay, so what about completely legalized drugs like cannabis, which brings in tens of millions of dollars a year to this side of the state?
We're doing better than some of the dispensaries in Portland because, you know, we only have one other shop here.
Julie Batesel opened Tumbleweed Cannabis Company 6 years ago. And she says this time of the year, 80% of her clients are local.
We were surprised. Yeah, we thought it would be mostly the 20-somethings just wanting to get high. And of course, we have that, but the vast majority of our customers are people who have some kind of an ailment and they're looking for relief. Veterans with PTSD, and they can't, or people who can't sleep, or the elderly people who want something because their knees ache, or, you know, someone who has cancer and needs RSO, which is Rick Simpson oil. So we're helping people with that.
Julie says she's aware the majority of people in Harney County, including some of her clients, want to be part of Greater Idaho.
But the problem for me is it will put us out of business. And it will effectively kill the cannabis market for this area.
That's because marijuana sales and production are illegal in the gem state. And if Greater Idaho's plan to include all of southern Oregon goes forward,
and that's where all of our outdoor flower is grown,
most of the state's cannabis crops, Julie says, would have to go indoors.
Which indoor weed is fantastic, but it's expensive, and I think that it will fuel the black market. Because, you know, people are going to need their medicine, they're going to find a way to get it.
So obviously you're not in favor of Greater Idaho.
I am not. I'm not, but I understand the other side. I lived in Idaho most of my life, and so I understand where they're coming from, but I think maybe they haven't considered how many people this will affect negatively.
Lots to think about there. And by the way, if you missed any of our Greater Idaho series, you can watch them right now on our streaming channel, KGW+. It can be found on Roku or Amazon Fire. You can also head to the KGW YouTube channel to find our content. It's updated every single weekday. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. I'll